Hello, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the channel, guys. Another week, another Last of Us review. This one is episode 3. It's called Long Time. And it's actually a long episode. It was an hour and 15 minutes. Before we crack into it, don't forget to leave a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel as well if you're brand new, and don't forget to check out some of my other Last of Us episodic reviews, which are coming out weekly. I will leave a link to each one in the description of the video below. So without further ado, let's crack on. Events carry on directly from episode 2. We start off with Joel stacking rocks by a river, down by the river, 10 miles west of Boston. There's a bit of awkwardness there with Joel and Ellie, and as I said in the prior parts and the prior episodes, I was a little bit worried about where this was going. I wasn't sure that Bella Ramsey, for one, could carry off Ellie's character, but she is fantastic. This episode just reinforces that. Joel was exactly the same. So Pedro's character is going through that transition at the minute where he's still grieving about not only Sarah, but Tess now as well. He's really torn between what he's here to do. He's lost himself a little bit, but Ellie helps him find that, and it's really touching to see in this episode particularly. But we're going to be going into other stuff in later episodes where they're going to be put into positions where they're going to have to defend each other, they're going to have to help each other, and the bond is going to be booming. It's going to be great, it's going to be amazing to watch. So we see this awkwardness in the beginning of the episode. There's a bit of acceptance and respect between Joel and Ellie, but they have a bit of a banter. They're quite firm, they're quite sort of annoying to each other, but there's also that mutual respect as well that they have for each other throughout the episode. But it starts off that way. She says to Joel, do you want my jacket back, your jacket back? And he's like, no. Chucks her a bit of food, and he's just sharing out his rations. She then talks to him about certain choices and saying, I'm not taking the blame for those decisions. What happened to Tess, for example, it is what it is. It's the world that we live in now. Don't blame yourself. There's no point, and also don't blame me. I'm not taking the sting for it. So Joel kind of stands there and respectfully is like, yeah, I get that. That's kind of like me. That's exactly what I would say and what I would do. So he just stares at her and gives her this sort of respect and just acknowledges that she's actually becoming her own person. She's coming out of her shell a little bit. She's very powerful and confident in her own words. And I think Joel looks at her and he thinks, you know what, that's what Sarah used to be like. It's resembling Sarah a lot. So he's all for it. We then, I've already touched on it, but the whole Joel and Ellie's relationship is absolutely excellent. It's portrayed so well in this series. And I think it's only going to get better, especially for those of you that have played the games, you know what's coming up in terms of timeline and events, and it's going to be crazy. So the relationship is already excellent. It's already strong. I love Ellie's little quips or one-liners that she comes out with, and just Joel's stone cold sort of reaction on his face is brilliant. It's comical, and it's a replica of the game. That's exactly the type of relationship you get in the game. The characters are portrayed so well by the actors, and I think it's an amazing casting choice to do that. We then sort of go in where we're honing in on the journey itself. So we're back on the road. They are traveling. They're trying to get to Tommy, who is Joel's brother, and Ellie is obviously being dropped off to the Fireflies. Now, Joel doesn't know the extent of what the Fireflies know and why Ellie's going there. For those of you that played The Last of Us all the way through to the end and have seen the ending, you will know what the secret is. But Joel's not there yet. He doesn't know what the issue is. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know exactly why. He just sees Ellie as a bit of cargo, basically, and it's a payoff. It's a means to get to Tommy, so he's just doing it, and at this point it's a little bit of an inconvenience. But anyway, they're going back to sort of the journey. We see a lot of the on-road stuff, so their interactions with each other, their mood, what they've sort of had to put up with throughout the journey. They're both carrying a lot of emotional weight as well, and we get that in the dialogue and some of the acting that we see on the screen. Then we zone in on a great CGI scene. So Ellie ends up in this sort of like abandoned house or abandoned sort of shop or something, this empty building basically. She finds an underground section, she goes underground, and she sees what looks like, CGI is great by the way in this bit, what looks like a very last stage of a clicker. Wrong series. I'm talking about Resident Evil. A clicker. Clicks, not licks. So she sees like a head, and the CGI is fantastic. You can see the fungi, the shrooms growing out the side of the face, and she sort of acknowledges it, goes over to it, and slowly sort of cuts the knife across the top of the head. It's trapped under some rubble. It's not able to move or grab her or anything. You just see the head sticking out, and it just showcases that these are no longer people. They've been completely overturned by the virus, which we know from the past virus scenes in episode 1 and 2, but this just cements it. Ellie wanted to see it for herself. She wanted to see if it was true. Very bold move, but she literally just gets her flip knife out, cuts a nice little gash across the forehead, and the clicker does not respond to it whatsoever. No pain, no wincing, no reaction in the eyes, no head movement. Absolutely lifeless. So this kind of scares Ellie a little bit, but she also has a newfound respect for it. So when Joel's been saying the whole time, you need to be careful, you need to be mindful of what you're doing, what you're saying, who you're with, who you trust, this is now Ellie reinforcing that for herself with evidence. So she's kind of looking at it thinking, holy shit, this thing is not to be messed with, it's not to be sort of joked around with, and I need to watch my ass, basically. She also then feels a little bit of sympathy and kills the damn thing, so she shanks it in the neck, and it just sort of shows Ellie's compassion. Even though it is no longer human, it was once a human, it was once a person, it had a life, probably had a family, probably had a, you know, whatever, aspirations and all that. It was a living, breathing thing that could think and act for itself, and she shows that compassion by killing it. She could have walked away, she could have tormented it a little bit, you know, played around with it, discovered a little bit more about these things, but actually she just wanted to put it out of its misery, which was also showcasing Ellie's character a little bit from the game, which I thought was a nice touch. Just touching on the relationship with Ellie, Joel, and just how the characters are being portrayed, I'm absolutely loving it so far, guys. I think it's an absolute duplication of the game. It's nice to see it fleshed out a little bit more on the screen as well, but I think they are absolutely smashing both Joel and Ellie's characters, and also how they play off on each other, their relationship, how it's evolving. I think the timing's great, the pacing's great, the writing is excellent, and I think the lines and the dialogue itself, they're using some of the lines from the game, but they're also adding their own little influences and their own little quips as well on top of that, which to me fleshes out the story, fleshes out the relationship a little bit more, and it's great. I'm loving it. I'm all here for it. We're not going to get a good on-screen relationship, but they're already, from the interviews and stuff I'm seeing, they are bonding so well together. I don't know if they knew each other before Game of Thrones, but obviously they worked together on Game of Thrones as well, which I think was a very clever choice to get people that have casted and worked together before on other projects. So I've got absolutely no worries now whatsoever. I was initially when I first heard of it, and I thought The Last of Us, yeah, that's going to be great. But then I thought, oh my god, how are they going to deliver these characters? They're complex, the dialogue's sort of intricate, the story's crazy, the relationships sort of up and down roller coaster, so emotional as well. And because we didn't get to see much of Bella Ramsey in Game of Thrones, I went in with a very limited mindset, but I'm so glad I was put on my ass and I was wrong, because she's a phenomenal actress, and I think she's such a good pairing with Pedro as well. And because they've got that on-screen chemistry, the characters work excellently. And yeah, of course, I love the clickers, I love the story of The Last of Us, I love the world, I love the franchise, but at the same time, I think the golden egg in this series so far is the relationship between Joel and Ellie, and just seeing that unfold on screen, I think is amazing. It's my most favourite thing that's happening so far. So then we go back to Joel. He's explaining the truth to Ellie about how the virus has actually spread, so they're making their way north. And he says, you know, this is how it actually happened, because they see a pile of bones, and Ellie's like, oh god, I'm glad you said that, because I thought it was monkeys, and which, you know, most diseases are spread through animals of some sort. But he said, no, this is a virus that's got out of control, it's an airborne virus, it's fungi, da-da-da. Gives her the truth, basically. Then they see a pile of bones in sort of like a crater in the ground that's been burnt to a crisp, of skulls, bones, clothes all over it. She kind of asks what it is, and then Joel explains that when they set up the quarantine zones, they scoured the countryside, they emptied all the houses, they emptied all the streets, everything else, and they put as much as they could into the quarantine zone. So they tried to move them out of the infected areas and quarantine them, obviously bearing in mind, just checking first of all that they weren't bitten, there was no infection, and there was no risk of spreading that inside the quarantine zone. So they were taking people in. He did then say to Ellie, well, actually, this is a result of some of those quarantine zones being full. Not everyone was allowed in. If you were infected, particularly, you were just killed on sight. But this is just an example of trying to prevent the spread of the virus. So Ellie's like, well, why didn't they just let them be? Why didn't they just leave them alone, let them live? And Joel said, well, there's no room for infection. There's no room for it to be spread if they kill people. So couldn't put them in the quarantine zone. Rather than leave them out there and potentially open up the risk of the virus spreading to these people, they just killed them. So moral compass question thrown into the mix there. But then we get a flashback scene. So this is where it becomes, for me, I was very confused at first, and you go on a little bit of a ride now. So you go to a flashback scene where essentially what Joel was explaining, you just see like a dress, you see some clothes, and then it goes back in time. So it goes back to the time that Joel was talking about when the virus first kicked off and they started setting up quarantine zones, and the government essentially tried to sort of declare martial law, tried to get the army and stuff in and try and round people up safely. And those that didn't make it into the quarantine zones, or they didn't have room for, were killed, obviously. We get this flashback scene. So you see the government spraying like red X's on doors. Some of the people are lined up, World War II style. Some of them are going off that way to a quarantine zone. Some of them are going off that way to wherever. Some of them are being led to their death, basically. And it's a real sort of harrowing scene. We then see a lone guy. As it all dies off, this guy is like hid under his house. As he pops up, he goes outside with his rifle. He's looking around and there's absolutely nobody there. So everyone's gone. Everything's cleared. But this one guy's managed to hide under his house and get away with staying there. So he obviously didn't want to go down the hole into the quarantine zone, doing this, doing that. He's a bit Lone Ranger. We find out it's Bill. So Bill from the game and Bill in the TV series is very, very different, and you're going to see why if you haven't already seen the episode. Obviously go and watch it and then come back and watch this review. But the Bill that you see in this game is very different to the Bill you see in the TV series that we're watching. So it's Bill. So he comes out, he has a great time. He's like, great, I'm on my own. He does a little bit of like a Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone moment. He realizes he's on his own. He can get away with murder. He goes to the shops. He starts pillaging the shelves, raiding, looting. My kind of guy. Looting absolutely everything. Stocking up on gas, electric, fuel, food, clothes. Just goes as far and as wide as he can with his truck and just loots the hell out of all of it. And then just sets up camp, basically. Builds a nice fence around his house or the roads that he lives on. Sets up mortars in the ground. Sets up trip mines, bear traps, all sorts of stuff. And it's just really funny. He just has a great time. There's some really cool music playing over the top of it. So you just get that Home Alone feel when he's preparing for the burglars to invade the house. And he goes around setting up all the traps. We get that with Bill. He then sits down, has a nice steak. He's admiring his little Home Alone traps. He gets an alarm go off, and then a wandering sort of zombie wanders into one of the mines and then just gets shot by an auto rifle that he's set up. And he's just admiring his work. He just laughs at it and goes, oh, never gets old seeing that. And he's just admiring what he's done. It's a really cool and funny scene. We then fast forward 4 years, and he comes across a guy called Frank who falls into one of Bill's traps outside the house. Bill goes out, questions him and says, what are you doing here? And he quickly discovers that Frank is not infected. Frank then says he just wants to get to Boston. So Bill allows him out of the hole, and cut a long story short, allows him to shower, allows him to use some of the stuff in his house, gives him fresh clothes. Frank's like, oh my God, thank you so much. And then they quickly discover that they're getting on a little bit too well. So they start sharing similarities with their love for wine, fine wine, their music. There's an antique piano that Bill's got in the front room that Frank discovers and then sits down, starts to play it, plays it very badly. And then Bill's like, oh, no, this is how you do it. Don't butcher it. And then Bill comes in, plays the song perfectly, puts a nice little sort of vocal over the top of it. And then they essentially fall in love. It gets a bit weird then. Frank then says to Bill, go and shower, prepare yourself for sex, basically.
Hi, Matthew.
Hiya.
Do you fancy a bum?
A what?
A bum. Do you fancy a bum?
In what sense?
You know, like a bit of man-on-man action. Do you fancy a bum?
Oh, thanks very much. What a strange man. What a very strange man.
It's like washing the turkey before Christmas. Go and wash yourself and get ready. And then it's this weird bit where they're kind of in bed. It's supposed to be touching, romantic, but it just felt weird for me. It just felt out of place. And then I just thought, what am I watching? Is this The Last of Us? Like, what's the whole point of this? But I'm glad to say, guys, there is a point. It comes full circle. So I thought this is where the writing was going to take a massive dip and we were going to get some weird, just sort of out there, Neil Druckmann style type of writing, and that didn't really fit the context of the series. We've seen it in The Last of Us Part 2. There's a lot of gripes about how that was written, especially sort of after the first 2 hours of the game. So the rest of the game is just oblivious to anything that's happened prior, and it just goes for shock value over actual intellectual writing. But this makes sense. Reality is settling in. They both know that they're on their own. This is it now. They're together. There's a really funny scene where Frank sort of says, as they're doing the deed, you know, I'm not your whore. If you want me to do this, I'm going to stay here for another few days. And then Bill's like, yeah, that's fine. And then we fast forward 3 years and then they're arguing outside. So obviously he stayed a lot longer than 3 days. He stayed for 3 years. And then they're just having this row about normalizing stuff. So Frank says, I want to have people over. He talks about Tess and Joel. So they've run into Tess and Joel. Obviously them through passing, some of the running and the smuggling that Joel and Tess have been doing. They come across Tess and Joel, and Bill's like, Frank, we're on our own. There's nobody else here. We have no friends. Look at the street. It's empty. And Frank's like, no, I'm going to have friends over. We're going to have dinner. And they're talking about dinner like it's the normal world, like everything's still going on as normal. Frank is desperately trying to normalize their life, losing it a little bit, I think. And Bill is just like, look, Frank, you're deluded. This ain't happening. We haven't got any neighbors. We haven't got any friends. And then Frank's like, well, I spoke to this woman on the radio. Her name's Tess. And he's like, you did what? And then all of a sudden it cuts to the scene where we're sat with Joel and Tess. And they're sat there having food with Bill and Frank. So this is where the overlap comes in. I thought, okay, now it's going to make sense. Now it's going to tie into Joel's journey. And this is going to all make sense by the end of the episode. And gladly, it does. So Tess and Frank sort of wander off. Joel then says, you know, I know what you're thinking to Bill. We're good people. Bill's got the gun on the table. He's like half pointing it at him. And Bill's like, oh, do you? You know, Joel's like, yeah, we're good people. We're just trying to get by. We can help each other out. I've got supplies. You've got stuff we need that we can use that can help other people. You seem like you're just like us. And Bill's like, we don't need you. And Joel's like, that fence is knackered, mate. It's got about a year left on it. If you want better sort of wiring, if you want better equipment, better steel, I can get that for you. I will turn that fence from lasting a year to a lifetime. And Bill's kind of like, oh, this guy knows his stuff. So he can't really pull the wool over his eyes. And they talk about how they can help each other out. We then go on 3 more years. So there's a lot of time jumping in this episode, but it does make sense. And I do feel we see the bits that matter, which I'm absolutely fine with. If there's going to be constant time jumping and shifting in a timeline, as long as it makes sense and we see the key events, then I'm okay with it. So we fast forward another 3 years and we see Frank and Bill on a jog, and they stop in front of like a greenhouse type plantation, and Frank says, look, got something to show you. Bill sort of kneels down and he pulls off 2 perfectly plump strawberries, gives Bill one and just says, look, I traded one of the guns to Tess and she gave us some strawberry seeds. So obviously that relationship, pun intended, has bloomed and is now gone from a seed to a nice plant. And they're talking about how we obviously know that the relationship carried on, that they formed a bond, that Joel and Tess are now allies in a way, and they're mutually sort of compatible. So they share a nice strawberry, and then they start talking about how they can't be without each other. This whole love story blooms into it, which I'm fine with. It makes sense now. Like, But at the time when I first saw it, I'm like, what's it's got to do with anything? But more on that coming. So they talk about that. And then we just know at this point it's going down a very much this ain't going to end very well route. It's all too happy. It's all too nicey, sharing a nice strawberry with the one that you love. It's all going to end in tragedy. And it kind of does, but it's bittersweet. So anyway, we then move forward a little bit, and Frank wakes up to absolute carnage going on outside the house. The mortar fires are going off. The electric fence is being put to good use. There's flamethrowers going off, blowtorches, everything. Absolute carnage going on outside. So Frank wakes up, jumps up, looks at the window and sees that there's raiders trying to get into the house and get into the area, basically. He runs downstairs. Bill's nowhere to be seen. Frank's sort of frantically running around trying to see where Bill is. Grabs a handgun off the side, runs outside, and then we see Bill picking a few of them off with his marksman rifle, fully upgraded, full attachments, no recoil. And then he's having a bit of a showdown, and Frank's like, Bill, get inside, what you doing? And he's just picking them off. Bill's just casually, calm as you like, just murdering people, absolutely butchering them. But then he takes a hit with a bullet, and I thought, oh shit, here we go, this is where it's going to go south. Frank pulls Bill away. They get inside, and the raiders are all eliminated. There's a scene where we see Bill bleeding out, basically, on the table, and I thought this is how it was going to end. Bill was going to bleed out. Frank is done, and it's a very tragic, acquaintance turned friend turned love story, and it ended badly. But he didn't die. We then fast forward another 10 years, so both two guys are very old now, and Frank's actually the one in the wheelchair. So Bill fully recovered from his wound. He's okay. They're both old, but we actually see something's very wrong with Frank. So can't tell what it is, but he's paralyzed. He can't walk. He's in the chair, and Bill is essentially his half carer now as well. So we see him lifting him around the house, see him cutting up his food, giving him a drink that he's now using through a straw, all that kind of stuff. And then they're sat at the table, and all of a sudden Frank says, I've had enough. And Bill's like, what do you mean? And he said, I've had enough. I'm not doing it anymore. And he says to Bill how it's going to be. He says, I used to hate people. I used to hate this, used to hate that. But you showed me that there's hope in what's going on. You brought me out of such a dire situation. You gave me a chance. All I'm asking you to do is follow these simple rules. He says to Bill, can you please make me some toast? Can you go and get us our best outfits? We're going to get married. We're going to have a dinner, and then you're going to help me die, basically. Very emotional scene. Great acting by the two actors. Really feel it. You really feel the emotion and the punch there. Bill's essentially being told that he's going to have his last supper with the one that he loves, and he also has to kill him off, which is bittersweet. But obviously, it's one of those moral compass questions again. The show loves throwing this at us, and it's going to, in this scenario, this stuff would happen. It's believable. It's something that people that actually here and now, viruses aside, have to deal with every day throughout the world. So would you put someone to sleep permanently that you love, but you're killing them essentially? Could you do it if they asked you to? It's that whole euthanasia question. But we get that, and Bill reluctantly agrees. We then see Bill making the last meal, the first meal. So when they first met, Bill made him a nice steak, loads of veg. It looked delicious, by the way. My mouth was watering when I watched this episode. Probably didn't help that it was around tea time.
Naughty, naughty. You teasing me, you naughty, naughty.
But he made him a steak, poured out a fine wine. They had a great time, and Bill does the same. So it's like the first supper is the last. They have the steak, the veg, the wine, and Frank's kind of like smiling and says, you remembered. They have a great time, and they toast to each other. Initially, I wondered, as I said, where this is all going. But at this point, I knew what this whole point in this whole episode was. It was showing aspects of the virus and in terms of how it can impact normal people that aren't infected. So we've seen a lot of destruction so far based on the infection aspects of the virus. What it does when you're bitten, what it does when you turn. We've seen a clicker. We've seen people Tess got bit and she sort of turned actively. We've seen various stages of the virus being implicated on people. But in this scene, in this episode, we saw normal people, unbitten, fine, actually dealing with the the outcome of the virus itself, i.e. they have to isolate, they can't be out in the real world, there is no real world, they've got no friends, they're alone, and you're sat there questioning, would you actually want to become infected? Would you rather die than do that? Some people would, and it's sort of bringing that whole question up of, it's cutting you off from life. So even though you're not actually dead through the infection of the virus itself, you're kind of dead and you're just biding your time. It's kind of like being on death row. You're still alive, but what kind of life is it? You're waiting to die, which is essentially the whole point of this episode, and it made total sense. And this is the point where the penny dropped for me, where they were sat there having their food, they were talking to each other, and they both kind of opened up to each other and just said, look, we've had bad days, but the great days we've had have been great, and this is the end of the line for me. This is the end of the line for us. Very emotional, very touching. And what we actually see is Frank then drinking the wine glass that's got the crushed tablets in, and he starts talking about what's going to happen after, and Bill kind of admits that the tablets were in the wine as well, because Frank's like, hang on a minute, you didn't put anything in my glass, so what stops you from putting the tablets in the wine bottle? And Bill's like, yeah, just gives him a look. And then Bill just breaks down and says, what kind of a life would I have if you were gone and I weren't here? You made me believe in people, you gave me a chance, you gave me a purpose. If you're gone, I have no purpose. I'm old now as well. I don't want to live out the rest of my days on my own. It's very touching, very emotional attachment between the two characters, and Bill basically decides that he wants to pop himself too and not be left in the outcome of it, which is fair. Again, another moral question, would you do it? Most people probably would. At this point, we're clear that they're both going to die. They've both taken the tablets through the wine that's been put in the bottle by Bill. We then fast forward to Joel and Ellie, who find the outskirts of the gate. So they find the outside of the electric fence. Joel knows the key, gets inside, and then you think, shit, they're going to find him dead in the house, because we know they're all dead. So Ellie finds a letter from Bill. They're going through the house. Joel's looking for Bill, can't find him, goes to go in the bedroom, and then Ellie finds a letter, and it says, to whoever finds this, but probably Joel. So he knows Joel's going to come back, he knows he's going to find him, and he's left him a letter. So we then have a scene where Ellie is reading the last words of Bill, and essentially it's the keys to the house, the keys to the car, the bunker code, and he says to Joel, just take what you need. Also says to him, I hated the world, but through meeting Frank, it proved me wrong, and says that that's what they're both there to do. So Joel and Bill, they are there to protect people, and God help anyone who gets in the way. There's a little line that Ellie stops reading, and then Joel discovers that actually he asks Joel to keep Tess safe. Touchy subject. But Joel kind of goes outside, readjusts himself. He's a bit taken back by it, because he feels already he's failed, and obviously he feels like he's failed Sarah. But we do get some sort of retribution in Joel in this bit, because you can see on his face that actually he's still got a chance to redeem himself. He's got Ellie to look after, he's got a job to do, and he sort of pairs the two up with what Bill is saying. So you can sense that Joel's got some sense of hope in his heart, but he's still carrying that grief, as you would, from his daughter dying, and also Tess, both so tragically, both so suddenly. And he feels like it happened under his watch, so he feels responsible, as you would. So we then fast forward. Joel says to Ellie, we've got enough equipment here to get the car going. We've got batteries. Let's take what we need. But I've got some ground rules for you. You need to do essentially what I say. You don't question what I say. You don't bring up Tess. And if you do all those things, you'll be fine. Don't show anyone your bite. Don't show anyone that you've been bitten, or tell anybody, because if they see that you've been bitten, they'll shoot you first and ask questions later, basically. Giving her some survival tips. He's still massively against her having a gun, but Ellie manages to find a gun in the front room when Joel's having a shower and getting himself all cleaned up and sort of ready for the journey. She hides the gun in the bag. Those of you that played the game know what's coming with this, but that gun is going to come in handy, is all I'm saying. So they set up, they lay the rules with each other, and then Joel says, look, I'm going after Tommy. He's an ex-Firefly. I'm going to do what I need to do. I'll take you with me, but please abide by my rules. Please listen to me, and we'll be fine. Ellie's like, yeah, cool, whatever. So then the final scene is that they get into the pickup truck that is Bill's, and they drive off into the sunset. Ellie then finds a cassette tape in the glove box, puts it on. What's quite weird but touching in a way is Ellie has never been in a car. She doesn't know how it works because she's been born essentially into the world of the virus. She doesn't know much about the real stuff in the world, so she's never been in a car. She doesn't know how to put the seatbelt on, and Joel's like, this is a seatbelt, you do this, you do that, plug yourself in. And she's like, it's like a spaceship to me, it's so alien almost. And then Joel kind of treats Ellie in that moment again like a daughter. He's showing her how to put her seatbelt on, talks to her about the journey, talks to her about car safety, which is stuff that we all do as parents. But you just get that little snippet of what's going to boom into an amazing relationship where Joel essentially puts Ellie in that daughter role, and vice versa. Ellie looks at Joel as a dad. So very touching scene. We get the music playing from the cassette, and they're enjoying the ride together, and off they go. So this now in the game is the bit just before they get to Boston, just before the bit where you see the skyscrapers, spoilers, and the giraffes and all the animals and the space center and stuff like that, just before the lab. So there's 9 episodes in this series. I think we're not going to get to the lab until episode 7 or 8. I don't think it'll be saved to the last episode potentially. I think the last episode will lead into part 2, the game, and into season 2, but I might be wrong. But just based on the timing and trying to put myself in the timeline of the game, I think that's where it's going to fall. So the next episode, I think we're going to get more exploring, more backstories. I'm absolutely loving as well, guys, this decision they've made where they're showing other people's lives, other people's aspects of how they've been impacted by the virus. Again, as I said, the whole Bill and Frank thing, when I first saw it, I thought, what the hell is going on? What am I watching? Is this Brokeback Mountain 2023? I don't know. Why am I watching this shit? And then it turns out to be, it's a very clever way of showing us that the virus impacts people in every sense of the word, not just people that have been bitten, not just people that have been infected. People are out there alive, still living and breathing, but they're alone. They've got nobody. There's no interaction. Is that worse than death? Don't know. And it's just showing that whole side of it, and it's great. I really enjoyed it. I think this show keeps taking turns, and it's the right turns, and I keep thinking, oh no, it's going to plummet, but it hasn't, and it's been an absolute masterpiece of a show so far. I wouldn't say this episode was so incredibly strong as the first 2, but I still really enjoyed it. Bit confused in the middle. I thought, oh, what's going on here a minute? But by the end, totally made sense. I love the writing. I love the relationship between Joel and Ellie. That is my absolute favorite thing about the show so far. Just the whole Bella and Pedro bouncing off of each other. That on-screen chemistry is very much alive, and I can't wait to see where it goes. It's homage to the game. There's great CGI, there's great acting, there's great dialogue, the script writing makes sense, perfect characters. It's not in your face, and I was worried about the whole journey bit as well, that bit in the game where you essentially explore and you travel, and I thought, how are they going to fill that time? But they did it in this episode in particular with Bill and Frank's story, which again was very emotional, very touching, and it also opened the doors a little bit to the backstory of the virus, and also how far it can actually impact people, not just on a physical level, but emotionally and spiritually. So loved it. Great writing. If I was to give this episode a rating, guys, it's a solid 9 out of 10. The one and only thing that didn't make it a perfect 10 out of 10 is I felt like sometimes the pacing was a tiny bit off, and that's me just being critical now. 1 minute you're 3 years, then we're 10 years ahead, then we're sort of modern day, and it jumped across a little bit, but I get why they did it, because they were strict for time. And the episode itself was still 1 hour and 15 minutes, which is still very long, even by episode standards. It's almost a movie, so I liked it. Very good, apart from a very small pacing issue. But I think everything else tied in perfectly. As I said, love the writing, love the CGI, love the set pieces, love the backstories. I hope they keep doing it each episode, where you get a little bit of a backstory, either to the virus, either to something that's happened in the past that's impacting the future or the present, which is why we saw Bill and Frank. It then impacted Joel's story, his sort of path with Ellie, and it's all emotional, and they're all interlinked. So they're all struggling through the virus together, which is very nice, very touching. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. As I said, these will keep coming each week, so stay tuned into the channel for the next one. Hit the bell icon on the channel homepage and you'll be notified as and when it drops. Until next week, until next time, let me know your thoughts on the episode in the comments. And until next week, I will see you again very soon. Peace.